This is Zestology, new rules for living with energy, vitality and motivation. I'm Tony Wrighton, as always, walking around London, recording this podcast and walking around in my minimalist shoes. I have mentioned them on the podcast before. For years I've had a kind of succession of expensive and highly padded trainers, but it didn't really occur to me that very padded trainers isn't necessarily very primal. So fairly recently I went into a shop called Vivo Barefoot. I've not got any affiliation with them, but just tried their trainers on, and the shoes, the soles of the shoes are absolutely tiny, and I put them on and it felt great. I was walking down the street and I could feel every bump on the pavement, and it kind of made my legs work a little bit harder. It didn't feel quite as springy as normal, but it felt very natural. So I was wondering, is this natural or not? And so I decided I had to get a man in to tell me all about it, and here he is, someone who can tell us all about the correct way to walk, the correct shoes to wear, the right stuff to do with your feet to keep them healthy, and almost guaranteed, if you're wearing shoes at the moment, the shoes that you're wearing listening to this podcast may well be not that good for your feet. That came as a huge surprise to me. So here he is, Dr. Ray Mclanahan, talking feet and stuff. He's very well qualified on Zestology.
I would describe myself as a sports medicine podiatrist that focuses on natural therapies, or in other words, natural ways of healing our feet.
Yeah, and I've been very much looking forward to talking to you, because I've long thought that I walk in a slightly weird way. And it might affect my whole kind of posture, really. And then I more recently got into these barefoot shoes, and I've been banging on about them to everyone who will listen. It's quite an interesting theory. What's your theory about shoes and the way we walk, and about the kind of the modern gait?
Yeah, well, my theory is based upon the work of Dr. William Rossi, who published an article in Podiatry Management magazine in 1999, and the title of the article was "Why Shoes Make Normal Gait Impossible."
Wow.
And so my theory is based upon his work, which basically says the moment any one of us puts on a conventional pair of shoes with the conventional manufacturing, the elevated heel and the tapering of the toe box and the other features that we can talk about, we will never see natural gait in that person. So what Dr. Rossi got me thinking about, and what we basically teach in our clinic, is if we were to go around the world and look at different cultures, the way their feet are shaped and the way they walk and move, we would notice some startling differences between our culture and their cultures. In fact, what's interesting about Dr. Rossi is he did that very thing. He traveled throughout the world and he took a lot of photographs, and he studied cultures that had largely grown up barefoot or continue to live barefoot, and then contrasted that with what we see in America and what you see in the UK. And the differences are fairly compelling. In other words, we change the way we move, we change our posture, and most importantly, we negatively change the shape of our foot from what it should be to the shape of a shoe. And at that point, it no longer functions as it's intended, and our gait pattern suffers. And unfortunately, we end up getting pain, and we end up having to go to the doctor.
So what you're saying is that these kind of, for instance, these big padded trainers that we wear, or high heels, or kind of smart men's shoes with a bit of a heel and a tapered toe, they are not having a good effect on the way that we walk, and therefore they cause other joint problems elsewhere apart from the foot?
Absolutely true, Tony. In fact, a lot of research has been looked at the knee and the hip and the back, even things as far up the body as the cervical spine and the TMJ, the temporomandibular joint. A lot of folks have indicated that if our feet aren't functioning adequately, we're likely to also break down somewhere else in our body. Maybe the most prolific example is osteoarthritis of the knees. There's been some good studies that have looked at what happens when we wear shoes with elevated heels, or when we wear shoes with arch support. The research is fairly compelling that we are increasing the breakdown of these joints above our feet. So it's negative effects on our whole body.
So hang on, tell me that again with the knees. So when we wear shoes with support, it means that we put too much pressure on the knees.
We do. A better way to describe it, Tony, perhaps, in fact, the way the researchers describe it would be we increase torque on the knee. So in other words, a force that's not really supposed to be going through the knee, but ends up being placed upon the knee because we're not allowing the foot to function adequately. Our feet have a quarter of all the body's bones, and they're highly adaptable and they're highly compensatory, and they'll do a very good job for us for quite a while. Our feet will actually allow us to deform them, and we'll still move fairly well for a while. But predictably, people are going to break down, whether it be in their feet or their knees or their back. So yeah, if the feet are over supported or altered in their geometry, the example you give is if we elevate the heel higher than the front of the foot, yeah, we end up causing other joints to do work that they're not supposed to do, and it's not good work, it's negative work.
Wow. And you mentioned TMJ. Where is that around the neck?
It's our jawbone joint where our jaw connects to our skull.
Wow. So you're wearing shoes that really don't fit your foot properly, and you could have problems in your jaw.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, sounds crazy, but it's true.
So, I mean, this is quite interesting because I had knee problems for years. In fact, I had a knee operation when I was 19 years old, and I could never quite work out the problem. You went to loads of specialists, and none of them really knew what was going on. I still don't know if it was shoes or something else, but thankfully that seems to have kind of largely gone away. But you're saying that for a lot of people, knee problems and back problems is such a big one as well. I know from having done podcasts on backs before, a dodgy back causes you so much stress, doesn't it? Would that be from bad shoes as well?
Very much so, yeah. My mentor, Dr. William Rossi, who I mentioned earlier, and by the way, you might want to expose your audience members to some of his work.
Okay.
I've got 4 of his really good articles on my website. The one I mentioned earlier, Why Shoes Make Normal Gait Impossible, has a very telling graphic on the very front page of the article. It's got a woman standing in her bare feet, and it shows how her posture is straight and healthy and normal. And then it shows what would happen if we add a 1-inch heel to her shoes, a 2-inch heel, and then further a 3-inch heel. Obviously, we need to make changes and alterations elsewhere in our bodies for our body column to maintain an erect and upright posture. The downside of that is those compensations end up placing, kind of like we just mentioned, they end up placing torques and increased ranges of motion on joints that are never intended to go through those ranges of motion or to sustain those torques. So yeah, it's really compelling what we do to ourselves. However, one of the sad realities, Tony, is, as I mentioned, it oftentimes doesn't show up for many decades. So people don't really understand the negative that they're doing to their body with the footwear.
So are you suggesting, Ray, that we all walk around barefoot?
No, not entirely. I do think there's a lot of value in that. I practice a lot of barefoot activity myself. But what I think is safe to say is we can benefit similarly to being barefoot if we choose footwear that holds our feet in barefoot postures.
Yes.
If you look at the footprint of a baby, any baby throughout the world, you're going to notice that the characteristic finding is for the foot to be widest at the ends of the toes. And it's quite interesting. We make footwear for babies that are shaped like that shape, but only for about a year or 2. And then we begin this process. I suppose it's similar in the UK to what we do in the United States. We have this metal measuring device known as a Brannock device. It was designed in 1927 in New York. The problem with the Brannock device and the measuring of the feet with the Brannock device is it gives the width measurement at the ball of the foot.
Right.
As opposed to the ends of the toes where feet are naturally supposed to be their widest. So
yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the point I try to make to people is no, you don't have to be barefoot all the time. It's great when you can be in controlled environments like your home and certain areas of our environment outside. But quite frankly, if you can choose shoes which are a little harder to find and aren't in mainstream marketplaces usually. But if you can find shoes that are shaped like a natural human foot, widest at the ends of the toes, flat from the heel all the way out to the ends of the toes, it's my belief, Tony, that you can derive very similar benefits to what one would derive if they lived their lives entirely barefoot.
Yeah, and my interest in this was first sparked when I started kind of going down a rabbit hole, as I sometimes do, into barefoot shoes. And I went into a shop and I tried on a pair of these, and I don't mind saying it because it's not like they're sponsored or anything, but Vivo barefoot shoes, which have just got very small, thin soles. And I think they're about 3 millimeters thin. And I tried on these shoes, and instantly they felt like wearing a really comfortable pair of slippers. So yeah. I didn't expect to buy them, but I did buy them. And then I was walking to the tube, and I could feel every lump and bump in the road. And then I was walking along the visually impaired bit of the pavement before you step into the street, and I could feel all the lumps on my feet, and it felt really nice. And I was amazed at how well they fit and how comfortable it was compared to a normal pair of shoes, which felt rather big and clumpy when I went back to them afterwards.
Indeed.
So that's when I kind of first sparked my interest in this. I have to say though, Ray, that it does make me think. Do you think that when you make a shift from normal shoes to barefoot shoes, you should start slowly? Because I do feel like I'm putting quite a lot of pressure on my knees because of the way that I walk with normal shoes.
Yes, I definitely think that anybody that's going to make the transition should do it very slowly. In fact, maybe even more slowly than a prudent person would assume. In other words, I usually counsel people that it might take a year or more for your body to get fully adapted.
Yeah.
I think that the younger we get people to doing these things, the easier it is to adapt. Interestingly, a lot of times it's actually the folks that are older and have some joint or postural issues that are the ones that actually want to make the change. And for those folks who have been used to conventional footwear, I think it takes longer. And I think, and this is a good point to bring up, Tony, because I think a lot of people fail their experience either being barefoot or wearing barefoot style shoes because they don't employ a transition period. It feels really good, so they end up doing too much of it, and they overload their body's ability to adapt, and then they get hurt. And sadly, that's not a problem with the shoes. That's a problem with a lack of adaptation or a lack of training. Sadly, there's a lot of physicians in the UK and in America that think there's something wrong with unsupportive shoes. And so if you get hurt wearing that type of a shoe, you might be told, well, of course, they're unsupportive. That's not healthful. You need cushioning or you need arch support. So you're absolutely right, Tony. People need to take their time with this. I call it lifestyle medicine or lifestyle strategies. It's not something that should be thought about taking on right away. Rather, it should be something thought about taking place on a timeline that is unique to that person. You know, based on variables like their age, like how long they've been wearing conventional shoes, the strength of their feet, and so forth. But to your point, too many people wear a shoe like that, have the experience that you had, which can be a rather good one, but end up doing way too much too soon and then creating an injury and blaming it on the shoes.
And I must admit, I have felt like, at times my knees have almost been a bit sore wearing these shoes, but they're just so much more comfortable than my normal shoes now. So that is interesting to hear that it needs a kind of an adapting period. And actually, I often think that when I'm trying to work out if something's good for me or not, the answer often comes when I think, well, is it primal? Is it something that our ancestors would have done? And of course, our ancestors wouldn't have had heel support and arch support and all the rest of it, would they? They didn't have Nike Vapor Flies 300 years ago.
Exactly, which is why it's fascinating that people who defend the current footwear system, it's a very young system. What we've been doing, for the last 20 to 30 years does not in any way resemble our primal state. So I like your method of, asking yourself whether or not it's primal. I completely agree, Tony.
What do you run barefoot as well, or with barefoot shoes?
I do both. This time of year when the weather's nicer, I love to actually get out there in my bare feet. Obviously, I go slowly. I take the time to transition because our skin needs to get strong and tough to be able to endure running fully barefoot, on uncontrolled surfaces like concrete and blacktop. And when I'm not actually barefoot, I choose shoes that hold my foot like it's barefoot. So basically, I'm just getting a little bit of protection. I'm not getting a bunch of cushioning. I'm not getting stability or arch support. But yes, I love running in my bare feet.
Yeah. Wow. And then do you run like in winter or something like that? Do you run wearing kind of minimalist? I think they're called minimal shoes, aren't they?
They are. That's one of the terms, minimal. At our clinic, we like to use the term natural because the problem with using the term minimal is there's a lot of companies out there that say they've got minimal shoes, but their minimal shoes might have a pointed toe box, so they're not going to hold your toes in a natural position.
Right.
I personally prefer the term natural as opposed to minimal.
I mean, the reason I'm asking is because I think you're quite a runner, aren't you?
Well, I used to be. I still try to get out there each day. I enjoy it so much, but I used to be very competitive.
Yeah, I've been checking your website and I've been having a look, and it seems like you are a very accomplished athlete.
Thank you.
But I mean, you've probably heard I mentioned the Nike Vaporflies. They are supposed to increase your speed, Nike reckon, by 4%. So It's not very fair if you're lining up barefoot or with kind of, sort of minimalist shoes, and then you've got someone next to you wearing Vaporflies, and that might make you go 4% faster.
Well, it might if you actually agree with the claims that Nike's making. I'm not so sure I agree with that, Tony. In fact, one of the questions I'm frequently asking people is before we start to believe in shoe technology, we should try to find out what we can do with our own foot technology. And it's so fascinating. The marketplace tends to attribute features to footwear as if footwear has some intelligence. And yet we downplay our own body's intelligence when we wrap our feet up in overly cushioned shoes. So we can't actually make use of our nervous system and our proprioception. So it's rather fascinating what the shoe company does to the public in terms of making the public believe the claims that they make. So yeah, I'm not so sure I agree with that 4%.
Yeah. Well, they're pretty expensive, so people will be saving a lot of money if they don't get them anyway.
I see.
Just interrupting this podcast for one moment to remind you that it is brought to you by Dr. Stephen Simpson and I's course, iwanttounplug.com. If you'd like to access deeper states of focus, productivity and creativity, then you head to iwanttounplug.com. That's iwanttounplug.com, and start to use the skills of neuro-linguistic programming to unplug effectively and feel that focus, productivity and creativity. So if you fancy learning a little bit more about NLP, taking the course, using some relaxation challenges and meditations in there as well, then you can head to iwanttounplug.com, and remember, use the code Zestology for 30% off. That is it. Back to the show. Is your approach quite controversial in the world of podiatrists? Because I imagine a lot of people involved in helping people with foot issues would say heel support, arch support, padded shoes, make sure you've got the inverted commas right footwear. That's what they would say. Would that be quite different from your message, wouldn't it?
It would, Tony. I should say I was conventionally trained, and I held the traditional approach for a few years, but I, like you, had some of my own issues with knees and feet, and I wasn't necessarily satisfied with the answers I received or the treatments I received. So I've looked for a different way, based on the work of Dr. William Rossi. Yeah. And I think the distinction for the audience members might be the type of podiatry I practice now might be considered natural podiatry as opposed to conventional podiatry. And for the audience members, podiatry in America is what we would call an allopathic profession. So in other words, the way I'm trained is to try to make someone's symptoms go away, try to make their pain go away, make their foot feel better, not by employing natural methodology, but by employing treatments like arch supports and adding cushioning and so forth. So I guess if people were to understand what's different about our clinic versus conventional podiatry, we don't argue with the natural state. And we actually, there's a lot of good research out there questioning whether or not the conventional podiatric approach is actually based in science. There was a great article that came out of the British Journal of Sports Medicine, I think in about 2009, perhaps, that called into question the pronation control systems in the footwear, the elevated heel, the cushioning of the heel.
Yeah.
And there's no scientific evidence that any of that keeps an active person out of the podiatry office. Yet we keep giving the same recommendations to people over and over as if it's somehow based in evidence. And the sad reality, I think, is a lot of medical people aren't necessarily reading the literature. They're basically just reiterating what they were taught.
I've saved perhaps the most important question for now, which is it's the biggie. What is the correct way to walk? Is it heel to flat to toe, or is it kind of a very brief bit of heel, then more flat, and then more toe? Or is that all complete nonsense, what I just said?
I don't think so. I think what you said is true. It also depends upon who you speak with. There is a gentleman in Germany that wrote a book. It's escaping me right now, but he teaches a method where you touch down with your toes first and then you drop your heel. My opinion is that it's supposed to be heel to toe, not outside of the heel over to the big toe. But if you watch people that grow up truly barefoot and live their lives barefoot, they strike on the center back of their heel.
Yeah.
And they walk right through the front of their foot, not off the big toe, not off the little toe, but straight out through the front of their foot. But what's different about them, Tony, than most of the feet that you're going to see in the UK and most of the feet I see here in America, is the foot that they have is widest at the ends of the toes.
Yes.
So as they move from their heel to the front of their foot, their stability increases, as opposed to what we do in America and the UK with our elevated heels and our pointed toes. We literally create instability and additional movement that we wouldn't have if our toes were spread out and aligned to nature and time.
Because you can't stabilize yourself on your toes by spreading them out if they're all cramped into a small little hole at the end of your shoe.
It's impossible. Yeah, we have a few videos that we put out that try to help people understand this. I think one of them might be called pronation versus overpronation. And the irony of the anti-pronation shoes, the supportive and stability shoes, is they hold the front of the foot in the configuration that you just described, which basically creates more of the movement that they are suggesting they're inhibiting, the pronation. So they enhance the pronation, then they make the footwear stiffer to somehow try to prevent the pronation. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. What about, Ray, I've got a nasty feeling I know your answer to this question, but I love wearing flip-flops. And, it's kind of very summery, and I do like wearing flip-flops, but I've often thought that that's actually not very good for my back. I've just noticed a little, if I wear flip-flops for a couple of weeks, I can feel it on my back. Are you about to tell me that flip-flops aren't very good for me?
No, I'm gonna tell you there's one thing about flip-flops that might not be ideal, but I believe flip-flops are really, really good footwear. In fact, when I meet with people, and I talk to them about natural foot health, invariably many of them will travel abroad, or they'll visit some part of the world, excuse me, where those folks either go barefoot or they wear flip-flops. And one of my favorite pictures is from a Sherpa in Nepal with a pack on his back, weighing approximately 90 pounds, and he's wearing flip-flops going up the side of the mountain.
Brilliant, yeah.
Yeah, so I think, the one reservation I have about flip-flops, Tony, is the conventional type of flip-flop with a thong that goes between your first and second toes.
Yeah.
It does create a gait pattern that's not ideal because it causes us to clench our first and second toes to hold the flip-flop on our foot. That's not ideal. We get around that by recommending a flip-flop by a company called Toe Socks.
Okay.
SOX, TOESOX. And what's different about toe socks flip-flop versus conventional flip-flops is the toe socks model actually has cloth pieces that go in between each of the toes.
Oh wow, I'm not sure how stylish they sound, but they sound sound very, very good for the posture.
They're good for the posture. They're very comfortable. And one of the things about style, Tony, as you can imagine, if a person really wants to have natural, healthy feet in America or the UK, they're going to find themselves battling directly with fashion and with aesthetics and what people expect their feet to look like. Which is a huge obstacle for a lot of folks, particularly younger females. It's almost impossible to be a young female in America and wear the footwear that's available and recommended, and at the same time have healthy feet.
Well, the funny thing about that is that I've been wearing these Vivo barefoots for a while, and they are not shaped like normal shoes, because they're really kind of almost triangular shaped, and they go out at the end of the foot, so your toes can spread out. And I've actually got very wide feet and very wide toes, and so I find it hard to get feet and shoes that actually fit my feet. And funnily enough, I've had rather a lot of compliments about my Vivo barefoots. So thinking I would look a bit like a clown wearing these different shoes, I've had a lot of compliments. So I feel confident in that. And I'm just looking at the toe socks sandals now online. What a great idea.
They are, and they feel awesome too. I've actually done some running in them, Tony. They're intimate enough to my foot that they don't flop around like the conventional one. You know how you wear the conventional one and it kind of slaps your heel?
Yes, I do. Yeah,
and it's not very secure. The toe socks one is very secure. It's almost like a shoe.
Wow. So what it looks like, just in case you can't quite imagine, it's like a fork. There's that, and instead of one thong that goes in between the big toe and the second toe, there's tiny little forks that go in between each toe. That is absolutely brilliant. I'm going to get some of them.
Awesome.
Good stuff. Now, Ray, what is one, I ask everyone this question, and you knew it was coming. What is one book that you would recommend? And it can be to do with footwear or barefoot running or anything that you like. And what is one tip that you would have for people to live with more energy, vitality, and motivation?
Yeah, I would have to say probably my most recent book that I'm enjoying is written by a physical therapist here in Oregon, and it's called Running Rewired.
Okay.
And I'm really enjoying that. There's also a couple books out there by Jonathan Beverly. Your Best Stride is one of my favorites. He also came out with another one that I'm just starting to pick through right now, and the name of it's escaping me. It has to do, though, with being a runner your whole life. So I would say if your audience members can pick up Jonathan Beverly's work, that's really I love reading. There's so many good books, but I'd say those are probably on my top list currently.
Yeah, fantastic. And then what is one tip that you'd have for living with more energy and vitality?
Yeah, I would say just simply removing our shoes whenever we have the opportunity. You know, it's compelling to see how many people here in the United States wear their shoes all day long. They wear their shoes in their home. They wear their shoes at work. You know, so one of the very basic, simple things that people can do to start improving the health of their feet and the strength of their feet is just periodically take their shoes off.
Yeah, I'm off to the theatre tonight, and I'm not going to go barefoot on the tube in London, I don't think. But so someone's listening to this and they're thinking, okay, I'm down with this. What's the first step? What are the brands that I don't think you're affiliated with any brands in particular, but what are the kind of shoes that they might look at buying in terms of making this switch to a more primal way of walking?
Yeah, I'll name a couple brands, Tony, but I'd also mention that we have a shoe list that your audience members can access on our website.
Oh, do you? Oh, brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, and I might also, if we have the time, touch on one really, really important fundamental in terms of choosing these shoes.
Yes.
You know, I don't know, do you guys use the metal measuring device over there in the UK?
Yeah, you go into a shop and they say, what size are you? And they push you push your heel into a kind of a metal thing, and then they pull the toe down and they see what size you are.
Yeah, so I would discourage your audience members from using that approach because that approach is going to be selling them a shoe that's widest at the ball as opposed to the ends of the toes like we talked about.
Yeah.
We have a better method known as the sock liner test or the insole test,
Okay.
where when your audience members go to the store to look at shoes, if they pull the removable piece that comes with the shoe and stand on it, they're going to be able to see how their foot will relate to that shoe.
Oh,
In
yeah.
other words, 90% of the people that we've been evaluating for probably 15 years, when we do this test in the clinic, it shows that they're not able to spread their toes in their shoes, and it shows that their shoes are actively deforming their toes.
Oh, wow.
So I would encourage your audience members to use that as the method of choosing shoes. But a couple brands that we really like are, we like Vivo Barefoot, as you mentioned, although we'd like to see some of their toe boxes maybe even be a little bit wider still. We love Lems, Lems.
Okay.
We like Altra, Altra. We like Ahinsa, Ahinsa, Zero Shoes, Soft Star Shoes, Be Real Shoes. Oh, I could go on and on, Tony. We're living in a good time in our lives right now for people that are interested in natural foot health. There's a lot of good research coming out right now showing that strengthening of the feet is one of the best strategies that we can do. And fortunately, because of that, there's a lot of interest on the part of shoe manufacturers to make better, healthful, natural footwear.
That's so great. I hadn't really heard of any of those brands, but I've just written them all down, and I'll definitely check them out. And, you know, I mean, I think part of my interest was sparked by this because I've done a lot of walking this year, and did this challenge in the UK called the 3 Peaks Challenge, where you climb up the 3 tallest peaks in Wales, England, and Scotland in 24 hours. So that involved quite a bit of training. It was great fun. I did it with lots of friends, and it was all great. And I kind of developed these slight lumps on the back of my feet, kind of on my heels, really. And I Googled it, and up came this phrase, Haglund's deformity. And I thought, oh dear, that doesn't sound very good at all. But actually what I think it was just the pressure of wearing kind of slightly ill-fitting shoes that were just pushing my heel down into the, I don't know, like creating a bit of a kind of irritation on the bone spur at the back of the heel. I don't know if that sounds right to you. Anyway, as soon as I put on these shoes that fit so well and were kind of far more minimalist, it seems to be fine.
Do we have time for a quick story, Tony?
Yes, definitely.
As a sophomore in college, I developed exactly what you described. And I went to the training room and I got a bunch of Advil or, anti-inflammatory tablets and did a bunch of icing and did a bunch of therapy. And I couldn't get that pain to go away. And so I got shipped off to the orthopedic doctor who put some cortisone in an injection in there, and it didn't really help it. So I had a second injection. That still didn't help it. So the doctor wanted to cut part of my heel bone off. And I talked to my coach and I said, Coach, I'm really frightened by that. I don't want to have that because I love running and I don't want to, ever jeopardize the possibility that I might not be able to run again. Well, I redshirted that year and I was sitting in my dorm room and I happened to be looking in my closet where I had my running shoes lined up. And I happened to notice that inside of the heel counter, the back heel portion of the shoe, I had worn through all of the soft material down to a hard plastic heel counter. Right. And when I saw that, then I picked up a pair of the shoes and I happened to put it on and I noticed that it was rubbing exactly where my Haglunds, if you want to call it that, was. But to your point, I discovered what you discovered. I didn't have a foot problem. I had a footwear problem, know? And too many people are going to the doctor, the podiatrist, the orthopedic doctor, the regular doctor with a foot symptom that they don't understand isn't inherent to their foot. It has to do with what footwear they're wearing. And if there were one piece that I really want to get out there to the world is people need to learn more about shoes and what's not good. And, a simple thing like what you just encountered, which is what I encountered. Too many people will go and have an operation for that, not knowing that what they need fixed is their shoe and not their foot.
Yeah, that's so interesting, isn't it? Because to be honest, once I found these shoes that fit me quite well, I haven't even thought about it once. And before that, it was really irritated all the time. I was putting plasters. I had plasters on it every day.
Yes. Well, there's a lot of people out there right now suffering similarly, Tony, which is why I appreciate your experience and I appreciate you sharing this information. There's too many people out there that need just footwear education, but they're not. They're getting medical treatment.
Yeah. Well, Ray, it's been so good to talk to you. I've really been looking forward to it. And as you can tell, I've kind of gone deep into the rabbit hole with finding all these things. And I've got so many footwear brands to explore now. Where can people find out more about you? And where can they find that list of recommended footwear as well?
Yeah, probably the best place to find me and the footwear is www.correcttoes.com.
Okay.
So CORRECTTOES.com. Our shoe list is on the site. There's a lot of information there. As I mentioned, Dr. William Rossi's work, which was highly influential in my life, is listed on the site. And certainly your audience members can also check out those brands that we just mentioned.
Fantastic. And what about you? Is your running career winding down now, or are you still going out there in the toe socks, running around?
Well, I still run. I still dream. You know, I'm going on 53 years old here next month, but when I go out there, I still dream about the Olympics, and I still, enjoy running fast. Although I'm not really competing as much as I used to, I just really love it, Tony. It just makes me happy to be able to do it.
It's not too late for you to make the Olympics.
I wish that were true, my friend.
Ray, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's been great to talk to you.
Likewise, Tony. Thank you.
Dr. Ray Mclanahan, what a legend. Enjoyed hearing from him so much. And this podcast is about hacking energy and vitality and motivation. A big part of that is feeling good. If you've got a bad back or a gammy knee or your shoulder keeps hurting, that's not going to make you feel like full of energy, is it? And I know what it's like when you've got a kind of a slightly nagging back problem. You can't quite explain it. It really does your head in. So hopefully that has shed some light on it. And I'm definitely going to have to take out a second mortgage to buy all those things that Dr. Ray was suggesting I buy. The sandals with the extra toes. Yeah, I'll have to post a picture on my Instagram of that. I'm just not sure how stylish it would be. But in the name of presenting a health podcast and kind of recording my travels along the way, I will do it, and maybe it'll look cool or maybe it won't be. So second mortgage or not, looking forward to trying out those various recommendations of Dr. Ray. And thank you as always for listening to Zestology. The hacks page is still up and running, tonywrighton.com/hacks. I think I've now put a link to Vivo Barefoot on there as well, so those trainers, but it actually sounds like Dr. Ray might have mentioned and recommended some even better brands. And that is it. So as always, have a great and zesty week, and I'll see you next time.